Welcome back to Klepper's Corner. Today in history. You know, historians like to pretend the past is neat and orderly. They imagine timelines as these clean little rows of dominoes. One thing leads to another. Civilizations rise, empires fall, and everybody learns a valuable lesson. But every once in a while, you look at a calendar date and realize history is less like dominoes and more like somebody dumped an entire bucket of Legos on the floor and said, "Good luck, humanity." And today's Lego pile is March 5th, because for some reason, this date has repeatedly attracted world-changing events like moths to a very historically consequential flame. Empires launch doomed invasions. Revolutions ignite. Democracies collapse. Dictators die. Nuclear treaties are born. If history had a busy day setting, March 5th is the one where the universe clearly forgot to hit pause. So tonight, we're traveling through centuries of chaos, ambition, genius, and catastrophic decision-making, all packed into one oddly overachieving day on the calendar. Segment 1, the Roman emperor who tried to reboot paganism. In the year 363 AD, Roman Emperor Julian, known to history as Julian the Apostate, left the city of Antioch with about 90,000 soldiers and one very ambitious idea: invade Persia and resurrect the glory days of Alexander the Great. Now, when you name your war plan after a guy who conquered half the known world, that's either confidence or the historical equivalent of saying, "Hold my wine goblet." Julian wasn't just fighting Persia. He was also trying to reverse the Christianization of the Roman Empire. Christianity had been rising under Constantine, and Julian wanted to bring back the old pagan gods. So his strategy was basically win a giant war, become a legendary emperor, and convince everyone Jupiter was trending again. Unfortunately, reality intervened. The campaign quickly became a logistical nightmare. Supply lines collapsed, Persian forces pushed back hard, and Julian himself was killed in battle later that year. Which means the entire Revive Pagan Rome project lasted about as long as a New Year's gym membership. And with Julian gone, Christianity continued its rise across the empire. One emperor's military gamble ended up locking in the religious future of Europe for centuries. Which is a reminder, if you're planning to change the course of civilization, maybe start with a smaller project first, like reorganizing the Senate seating chart. Segment 2, a medieval travel blogger accidentally preserves history. Jump ahead to 1046, when a Persian philosopher named Nasir Khusraw decided to quit his government job and take a 7-year journey across the Islamic world. Now, today we call that backpacking. But in the 11th century, this was basically the equivalent of saying, "I'm going to wander across half the Middle East and write about it." And the result was the Safarnama, one of the most important travel accounts in medieval history. Khusraw documented cities like Jerusalem, Cairo, and Mecca with the detail of someone who clearly had no idea future historians would cling to every paragraph like academic gold. He wrote about markets, architecture, culture, and daily life, which means today we know more about the 11th century Islamic world because one guy decided to go on the longest road trip in recorded history. It's like if someone today started a travel vlog and accidentally became the most important primary source for an entire civilization. Somewhere there's a medieval historian whispering, "Thank you for the blog post, Nasir." Segment 3, the birth of the king who built a mega empire. Now let's jump to March 5th, 1133, when a baby was born in Le Mans, France. And that baby would grow up to become Henry II of England. Now, if you're thinking, okay, cool, medieval baby, let me explain why this matters. Henry II basically built what historians call the Angevin Empire. At its peak, he controlled England, Normandy, Anjou, Aquitaine, and influence across Ireland and Wales. In other words, medieval Europe's version of a real estate tycoon. But Henry wasn't just expanding territory. He rebuilt England's legal system and laid the foundation for English common law. Royal judges traveled the country, courts became more standardized, and suddenly justice was slightly less dependent on which local baron happened to own a sword. Of course, his reign also included family drama so intense it makes modern royal gossip look calm. His own sons rebelled against him. One of those sons was Richard the Lionheart. Another was King John, the guy who eventually got forced into signing the Magna Carta. So Henry built a giant empire and then spent the rest of his life watching his children try to burn it down, which honestly makes medieval royal succession sound less like governance and more like Thanksgiving dinner with swords. Segment 4. The Boston Massacre and the Birth of American Propaganda. Now let's jump to a very famous March 5th, 1770. Boston. Snowy streets. British soldiers facing an angry colonial crowd. And suddenly, gunfire. 5 colonists died in what became known as the Boston Massacre. Now, historically speaking, the event itself was chaotic and messy. Soldiers were being hit with snowballs and clubs. One fired, then others followed. But the real explosion happened afterward, in the battle for public opinion. Enter Paul Revere. Revere created an engraving showing British soldiers standing in perfect formation, calmly firing into a group of innocent colonists. In other words, the 18th century version of a viral political meme. The image spread across the colonies and helped ignite revolutionary sentiment. Because nothing motivates a population like the feeling that the empire just shot your neighbors in the street. Even John Adams, who defended the British soldiers in court, later admitted that night planted the seeds of American independence. So March 5th gave the colonies something powerful, a symbol. And history loves symbols. Segment 5. The day democracy voted itself out of existence. Fast forward to March 5th, 1933. Germany held federal elections. Technically, this was a democratic vote. Technically, because Adolf Hitler had already taken power as chancellor and used the Reichstag fire to suspend civil liberties. Opposition leaders were arrested, newspapers were shut down, and Nazi stormtroopers were terrorizing political rivals. Which means this election had roughly the same level of fairness as a boxing match where one fighter shows up with brass knuckles and the referee has already been arrested. The Nazis won 43.9% of the vote. Not a majority, but enough. With coalition partners and the removal of communist lawmakers, Hitler gained the numbers needed to pass the Enabling Act weeks later. That law allowed him to rule by decree. And just like that, Germany's democracy legally dismantled itself. History books often ask how dictators rise to power. March 5th, 1933 gives us one uncomfortable answer. Sometimes they use elections. Segment 6. The pact that helped free India. While democracy was collapsing in Europe, another movement was reshaping an empire. March 5th, 1931. Mahatma Gandhi signed the Gandhi-Irwin Pact with the British government. This agreement followed the famous Salt March, where Gandhi led thousands of Indians in a protest against Britain's monopoly on salt production. And if you think protesting salt sounds small, that was exactly the point. Salt was universal. Everyone used it. Everyone needed it. So when Gandhi marched to the sea and made salt illegally, it turned into a massive act of civil disobedience. Tens of thousands were arrested. But the British government realized something dangerous was happening. They were losing the moral argument. So the pact released political prisoners and allowed Indians to make salt freely. It didn't grant independence immediately, but it forced the British Empire to negotiate with Gandhi as a legitimate political leader, which is remarkable. Because one man with a walking stick and a philosophy of nonviolence managed to shake the largest empire on earth. Segment 7. Stalin dies and the Cold War changes. March 5th, 1953. Joseph Stalin dies, and the entire Soviet Union collectively takes a deep breath. Stalin had ruled through terror for decades. Purges, executions, secret police, millions dead. When he finally died after a stroke, Soviet leadership scrambled into a power struggle. Nobody wanted to become the next dictator. Mostly because becoming the next dictator meant everyone else might try to remove you, Within months, Stalin's secret police chief, Lavrenti Beria, was arrested and executed. Political prisoners were released. The infamous doctor's plot was declared a fabrication. The era of de-Stalinization had begun, which didn't make the Cold War peaceful, but it did slightly reduce the number of people being arrested for owning the wrong kind of mustache. Segment 8, the treaty that tried to stop nuclear chaos. Finally, we arrive at March 5th, 1970. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty officially entered into force. Now, this treaty might sound technical, but its goal was very simple: stop the entire planet from turning into a nuclear weapons convention. By the late 1960s, more and more countries had the scientific knowledge to build nuclear bombs. Without a treaty, the world might have ended up with dozens of nuclear-armed states, which would make international diplomacy feel less like negotiations and more like a very nervous game of global hot potato. The treaty created 3 pillars: prevent new nuclear states, encourage disarmament, and allow peaceful nuclear energy. Today, more than 190 countries are part of it, which means the international community collectively looked at nuclear weapons and said, maybe let's not make this everyone's hobby. And honestly, that might be the most sensible historical decision we've covered tonight. In conclusion, March 5th shows us something fascinating about history. Empires launch wars. Philosophers record civilizations. Kings build legal systems. Crowds ignite revolutions. Dictators manipulate elections. Peaceful protest reshapes empires. And nuclear treaties try to stop humanity from accidentally vaporizing itself. All on the same date. Which means if you ever wake up on March 5th and things feel a little historically chaotic, don't worry. Apparently, that's just tradition.